Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's CITI program webinar. Today's topic is U.S. Department of Defense Regulations and Requirements for Human Subject Research. It will be presented by Dr. Ann Johnson from the University of Utah. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Dr. Johnson is the Director for the University of Utah Institutional Review Board and Human Research Protection Program. She specializes in research ethics and is an expert in human subjects research regulations. She has been a leader in establishing a single IRB process with the Trial Innovation Network. She has conducted research and public health interventions in the United States and abroad. She has taught undergraduate and graduate level courses and is instrumental in continuing research education for the University of Utah. Dr. Johnson also serves as a site visitor for the Association for the Accreditation of Human Research Protection Programs. And now I'm going to pass the mic to Ann.
Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to get to be here with you today to talk about this topic. Before I begin, I would like to indicate that I do not have any relevant personal, professional, or financial relationships with respect to this educational activity today. So today, as we focus on research with the Department of Defense, we have three learning objectives. First, I will give you direct reference to the DoD regulations and the applicable guidance that the DoD has issued. In addition to this, I will summarize the organizational components of the DoD, which can be a little bit complex, and the human research protection offices that are established within the DoD. Second, I will give you a detailed overview of the specific DoD requirements for investigators and IRBs. This will also include some specific protections for populations that may be included in the research. And third, I will present on some of the limitations the DoD has for the conduct of research, which includes some limitations on the use of a waiver of consent and the inclusion of certain populations. So let's begin by centering ourselves with the DoD regulations themselves. The Department of Defense is a common rule signatory, meaning that an IRB and investigator must apply all provisions of the common rule, which is Subpart A. The DoD has codified their subscription to Subpart A into their own regulations, which is in 32 CFR 219. As will also be discussed later in the presentation today, the DoD also expects Subparts B, C, and D of 45 CFR 46 to be followed as well. Though the DoD has some additional expectations for inclusion of the populations that are described in all of those subparts, B, C, and D. So we'll talk about those in more detail as we move forward. It is important to understand when the DoD regulations apply. So according to DoD guidelines, DoD regulations apply when the research is conducted or supported by a DoD component. The phrase conducted or supported can mean a few different things, which I have here on the slide. First, it may mean the DoD is acting as the funding agency, providing financial support for the project, and this is becoming very common as more DoD-funded projects are released. Second, it may mean that the research is conducted at a DoD facility. Third, it may mean that the research is conducted by a DoD researcher or personnel. Or fourth, in combination with that, it's conducted in collaboration with DoD researchers and personnel. So it could be a multi-site study that involves DoD researchers. An important thing to note is that the DoD can conduct or support research that is performed with either US military personnel and or civilians as participants. The DoD does not limit research participation to military personnel only, which may be an assumption some have because that's what the DoD represents. Much like how academic research institutions have ancillary review requirements that are separate from the IRB, the DoD component that supports the research may also be required to conduct an administrative review of any non-exempt human subject research, which would be occurring in addition to the IRB review that's needed. This administrative review is also known as a component level administrative review, or the acronym CLAR, according to DoD Directive 3216.02. There are a number of different things that can trigger the requirement for this administrative review. I want to give you a few examples. First, if the research is conducted in a foreign country with foreign institutions and citizens, the administrative review will be needed. Another example is if the research requires a waiver of informed consent or involves fetal research or is classified. You will come to see as we go into these slides further that each of those things, the waiver, fetal research, and classified research, all have additional little requirements, and that administrative review is helping to ensure that those additional pieces are met. So if you want to see the full list of when an administrative review is required, please refer to the directive document itself, and you can look at all of the different scenarios. Additionally, much like academic research institutions, the DoD component needs to keep regulatory documentation on file for each study it supports or conducts. I have provided a simplified list of such regulatory documentation here on this slide. DoD Directive 3216.02 outlines the investigator responsibilities for DoD research, which I have summarized on this slide. None of these responsibilities differ significantly from national standards or the requirements of other federal agencies. However, there are specific ways to meet and document the performance of these responsibilities that the directive document outlines. I encourage all institutions and investigators conducting DoD research to become familiar with this section of the directive document, as I will not go into the specifics here. I will, however, go into more detail about the scientific merit review, which is noted here as the last note in the next slide. But before moving on, it's important to note that Directive 3216.02 is not the only guidance document that investigators must heed. As I noted earlier in the presentation, there are many different guidance documents that are on subtopics addressing subsets of research that may be conducted or supported by the DoD. Depending on the study in the military department's HRP office, make sure that you're paying attention to any of those additional requirements. As I mentioned earlier, the DoD does not allow for research on detainees or prisoners of war. There is one exception, which allows for detainees to receive investigational treatments when the same products would be offered to U.S. military personnel at the same location for the same condition. Where we are currently living through pandemic conditions for COVID-19, you can easily imagine situations where the use of investigational products as potential treatments or vaccines is of benefit to the detainees. And this exception allows for more equitable distribution of possible benefits of research.
All right. Thank you to everybody for participating. Really glad for that. So just some closing points today, and then we want to continue on with some of the Q&A that's being exchanged in the chat. So I hope that this information today has helped you to understand the importance of the DoD requirements and knowing when to apply them and what things need maybe special attention by your investigators or your IRB, maybe that are outside the norm for what you normally do. DoD requirements do go beyond what is required by the common rule, even though that they subscribe to the common rule. So it's important to pay attention to those key things. There are many written resources provided by the DoD components that will help you understand these additional requirements. And I will note that though I have had the great opportunity to work with the DoD and be involved in the review of DoD research, I am by no means the DoD expert. I've seen a lot of guidance documents. I've applied them to a fair amount of research, but there's always new information. There's always new guidance that comes out. And to that end, the DoD HRP officers, in my view, have been an excellent contact for assistance to help understand what's going on with the DoD and new potential changes. I note that some folks in our audience today are helping to provide some additional clarification about things that are going on with the DoD, and I'm really appreciative of that kind of collaborative effort that we have here today. And I've had nothing but positive experiences in working with the DoD. It doesn't mean there haven't been things that either I haven't understood as a reviewing IRB or that they haven't understood as the HRPP. We've always been able to work through those things though. And I've definitely felt supported in that. So I would encourage everybody to make a good friend within the Department of Defense. They're good friends to have.
I also invite everyone to review our content offerings regularly, as we are continually adding new courses and webinars in various areas of research, ethics, compliance, and professional development. You all may be interested in our course on communicating research findings. This new course focuses on effective practices, guidelines, and strategies for communicating and presenting research findings. And we also have a course on protocol development and execution that provides a tactical approach to clinical protocol development and implementation. They're all part of our commitment to develop relevant and helpful new content.